On the 19th of May 1536, the second wife of King Henry VIII was led to the execution scaffold inside the Tower of London, where a French swordsman was waiting for her. Anne Boleyn had been condemned to death for adultery, incest and treason, with the charges saying she had plotted with other men to bring about Henry VIII, her husband's downfall and death. All of these charges are considered today to have been false, and that Anne Boleyn was simply murdered by her husband's insistence and need to get rid of her, so that he could then be free to marry his third wife, Jane Seymour. But Anne Boleyn, throughout her rise to the position of queen, did encounter a number of enemies and people who did not support her. Some of these, such as Sir Thomas More, lost their heads on Tower Hill for their insolence and for offending the king, but there was a woman who was very hated by the queen, and she did have a number of significant arguments with her. Lady Elizabeth Stafford was also known as the Duchess of Norfolk, but she was subjected to a terrible amount of abuse in her marriage with Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk, who was one of Henry VIII's most senior ministers and officials in the government. But why did Lady Stafford become the enemy of Anne Boleyn? Lady Elizabeth Stafford was born around the year 1497 and was the eldest daughter of Edward Stafford, the third Duke of Stafford, and Eleanor Percy. Her grandmother was the sister of the Queen of England, Elizabeth Woodville, and the wife of King Edward IV, but her grandfather, Henry Stafford, the second Duke of Buckingham, was executed for treason by the usurping King Richard III in the year 1483. Later, her father would experience the same treatment as during the reign of King Henry VIII. Edward Stafford, the third Duke of Buckingham, was executed on Tower Hill by axe upon the insistence of the English king. But Elizabeth, before her father's execution, lived at home and was given a decent form of education in the hopes that one day she would marry a wealthy duke or earl, who would then gain further power, favour and wealth for the family. Elizabeth Stafford arrived at the royal court in 1509 and served as a lady-in-waiting to Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and she was close with Catherine, and the pair became friends, and this friendship would last a long time, until the death of Catherine decades later inside of Kimbolton Castle. She was loyal to Catherine, and of course Catherine's big rival was Anne Boleyn, who became the second wife of the king once Catherine was out of the way. Elizabeth married Thomas Howard, the Earl of Surrey, who later became the third Duke of Norfolk when she was just roughly 15. Howard was a lot older and was in his late 30s when the pair married, and he was old enough to have been her father. He had previously been married, but Elizabeth had been promised to marry Ralph Neville, the fourth Earl of Westmoreland, and the pair loved each other, and this would have been a rather happy marriage. She later wrote regarding this that, "He and I have loved together 2 years, and my lord, my husband, had not sent immediately word after my lady, and my lord's first wife was dead. He made suit to my lord, my father, or else I had been married before Christmas to my lord of Westmoreland." But Thomas Howard was obsessed with Elizabeth Stafford, and whilst he was offered her other sisters, Howard would take no one but Elizabeth. She had a dowry of 2,000 marks and a regular payment of 500 marks a year, but this was never kept up. Elizabeth was said to have been someone who served her husband well, and was seen at court every day for 16 years, regularly being there whilst her husband was away fighting Henry VIII's wars and doing other business. But the Duchess of Norfolk, as she was now known, was always at court, and the pair had 5 children. Some claimed that the pair were bonded by mutual love, but the real picture was that this was an abusive marriage, and the relationship. Her husband, Thomas Howard, took a mistress named Bess Holland, whom he lived with, and this was viewed by Elizabeth Stafford as a disgrace. But then Elizabeth encountered a number of issues with a new prominent fixture of the royal court, a woman who was captivating many people, including Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn was the niece of Thomas Howard, and she would become the enemy of Catherine of Aragon, Elizabeth's close ally. Elizabeth remained very loyal to Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, and she turned her back upon Anne, and the king was obsessed with her. She smuggled a number of letters to Catherine which were hidden in oranges from European ambassadors and royalty, and Elizabeth acted as a go-to between for the exiled former queen and allies across the English Channel. But in 1531, the Duchess of Norfolk found herself thrown out of the royal court at the insistence of Anne Boleyn, as she continued to declare that she was loyal to Henry's first wife and refused to break off her friendship with her. This caused a great amount of offence for Henry VIII and also Anne Boleyn, who continued to argue with the Duchess of Norfolk, and there were further outbursts when Anne Boleyn ordered that Elizabeth's daughter, Mary Howard, should get married to Henry VIII's illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy. But Elizabeth Stafford was a brave lady and continued to voice her discontent towards Henry VIII's second wife, and when Anne Boleyn was crowned the Queen of England on the 1st of June 1533, the Duchess of Norfolk did not attend the coronation and refused to be involved in the celebrations despite her husband's standing, and she justified this decision as she did not want to depart from the love she bore to the previous queen. She had many things to consider at the time, as her husband refused to leave his mistress, and he wanted to separate from Elizabeth, which was considered scandalous. Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief adviser, claimed that she should have moved in with her brother, but Elizabeth remained strong and wanted part of her husband's estate that she was entitled to. She then documented the abuse that occurred in her marriage, and there were a number of shocking incidents recounted by Elizabeth. Thomas Howard was said to have grabbed Elizabeth out of bed when she was recovering from childbirth, and she was then dragged through the house by her hair and was then stabbed by a dagger. She stated that her husband set his woman to blind me till blood came out of my fingers' ends, and pinnacled me, and sat on my breast till I spit blood, and he never punished them. Her husband stated this was false and a lie, but the pair then, on the 23rd of March 1534, separated. This was not a fair split, as her husband took all of her jewels and had locked her inside of a chamber before she was then sent to a house in Hertfordshire, and Elizabeth was forced to write to Cromwell, saying she was being held in a state of incarceration and was given an insufficient yearly allowance to live on. Thomas Howard continued to keep his mistresses, and he did offer to return her jewels and clothes and give her part of his household items, but she turned this down. She received no support from her family, and many of her children turned her back on her. She wrote in a letter that, "I am of age to rule myself, as I have done these 5 years since my husband put me away. Seeing that my lord, my husband, reckoned me to be so unreasonable, it were better that I kept me away, and kept my own house still, and trouble no other body. I pray you, my lord, take no displeasure with me, although I have not followed your lordship's good counsel, and your letters as touching my lord, my husband, for to come home again, which I will never do in my life." She refused to go back to her husband, but her husband was later arrested and then sent to the Tower of London. But her son, Henry Howard, was one of the final people executed during the reign of King Henry VIII, as he was beheaded on Tower Hill for treason, and it was only the death of the Tudor king that spared her husband, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk. Her husband was released and pardoned during the reign of Mary I, the eldest daughter of King Henry VIII, as he remained locked up in the Tower during the reign of Edward VI, but he then died on the 25th of August 1554, and his wife was not named in his will. In the final years of her life, Elizabeth Stafford, the Duchess of Norfolk, was a godmother of her great-grandson, but she died on the 30th of November 1558 at Lambeth, and today is buried in the Howard Chapel in Lambeth. Throughout her life, Elizabeth Stafford, the Duchess of Norfolk, encountered a number of big problems, but she faced things head-on and was not afraid to confront even the King, Henry VIII, and his wife, Anne Boleyn, on a number of issues. She could have been condemned for treason for withdrawing her support of his second wife, and voicing her support of Catherine of Aragon, like prominent courtiers such as Thomas More were. But her husband's influence may have saved her, and Elizabeth Stafford continued to be a thorn in the side of Anne Boleyn. But she was treated awfully by her husband, and was subjected to a number of violent outbreaks at the hands of her husband. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.